So next up, we're going to be looking at the new features in the gradient tool in Photoshop. So there's this feature is found in several places, and we'll take a look at all of them here in a minute. But one of the classic methods for applying a gradient within your interface here is under the gradient tool up here at the top in the control menu, and you can pull down this drop down menu and choose from any one of these preset gradients. Just to illustrate this point that I'm trying to make here to show you the difference between what they're referring to as now the classic method of gradient application versus the newer methods. I created this little, just like a rainbow gradient that's going to have a series of stops that you'll be able to see these transitions across the board here once we apply them. So I'm just going to make a new document. And I'm just going to apply, just to show you the difference between these three possible methods that are going to be for this gradient tool. I'm just going to make a new guide layout. I'll set this up as 3 rows. That should be fine. And I'm just going to go in and make a basic marquee selection just to flag off these areas here. I'm going to jump into the gradient tool, and the first thing you'll notice that is different about this gradient tool is right here. There's a little option in the control panel at the top that says method, and the new default method is one that's known as Perceptual. So we'll take a look at how Perceptual is applied. So I'm going to start the gradient from the far left side of the document all the way to the far right side here of my canvas. I'm just going to hold the Shift key down and just make sure that it stays perfectly level. So that's what we get with the this particular gradient that I created set to Perceptual mode. Just going to move this selection down to the next spot here and jump back to the gradient tool. This time I'm going to choose the second option, which is one that's known as linear. So this one is a little bit more mathematical than optical. So I'm going to do the same thing, grab that end to end. And you can actually see here, there is even, before we start comparing these, you can see that there's a noticeable difference in the cutoff or the drop-off in that transition from especially the blues to the violet end of the side here. And last but not least, I'm going to jump back to my marquee selection, just bring that down. And the third option is what they're referring to now, the method as classic. So this is how the gradients have behaved in Photoshop in all previous versions right up until now. So when I apply this one, you can see there is a noticeable difference between those three. So if I just remove the guides here, you'll be able to see a little bit better. So first one, Perceptual. I believe what they're trying to do here is to create a more optically and visually and perceptually pleasant sort of blending between the different color stops within this gradient. I still find the transition to be rather abrupt there, but it's still less abrupt than it was in the classic edition. Of course, the second one, which is referred to as linear, this is the one that's very basically mathematical. It's applying a transition at very specific mathematical points right across the entire canvas. And then last but not least, we have the classic edition. So you can see that fall off is even more abrupt than the first one there. And you'll probably notice, maybe even slightly, depending on how your monitor is displaying this, there could be some more abrupt transitions depending on those color stops. So to show you how this would be applied in a non-pixel based layer, we could do this as well as a gradient adjustment layer. So if I apply the same thing here, gradient adjustment layer, I'm going to go and I'll show you guys how to do this one with a classic just black and white or foreground to background. My foreground and background happen to be black and white. So we're going to do a foreground to background black to white gradient fill here. I'm going to set this as just a 0 angle, so it's going left to right. And I'm going to leave this version in perceptual mode. And what I'll do here, I'll also pull up another little guide layout here. This time I'll do a vertical one. Let's set this up to have, let's say, 4 transitions here. So basically what you'd be thinking of here would be showing where 0 all the way up to 100, or in this case 255, if you're considering the RGB levels, and then all the shades of gray in between. So if you're looking at here, this would be roughly about the halfway point between pure black and pure white. And if I pull up my info panel here, you'll see it's giving me some numerical feedback on here about those actual values. So sure enough, if you see here way over on the far right hand side, I'm at 255. Way over here on the left side, I should be at 0. You can see that sure enough in the info panel, 0 in all 3 channels. And then if you're looking around here, you can see it's actually pulling up around 23. Here we're actually closer to 100 value, and then this one's about 188, 190. So it's fairly evenly blended, but I think it's designed here to be a little bit more optically applied. So the interesting thing about applying this through a adjustment layer, it's going to be a lot more easy to make this change should I need to. So just doing a double click on that adjustment layer, I'm going to switch this method from perceptual to linear, and you're going to see a huge difference here. So linear, wow. So this one is behaving, well, like I said, very mathematically. So of course, if I go over on this side, you'll notice the numbers way at the far left, 0, but then they start to climb almost 1 pixel at a time, 1 pixel value, and it very much is just spanning straight across linearly until you get into the 255. However, it looks like it's applying a linear method that's based on the method that Photoshop typically applies, exposure value or EVU methods, exposure value units, where the majority of the information is housed in the highlight values. So you can see there's a lot brighter elements here than the darkest of the dark, and that transition again, it's very even, it's fairly regular, except here it tends to fall off quite abruptly there. Let's look at the last option here, which is the classic method. And you'll see this one is probably very familiar, where it's basically breaking down into those sort of 4 categories where you have your shadow values, your darks, your lights, and then your highlights. And you can see numerically it's translating pretty much exactly that. So if I'm looking at this halfway point, you can see sure enough my RGB values are 128, exactly halfway between pure black being 0 and pure white being 255. So this is the 3 methods that you can see that are applied to the new gradient tool in Photoshop 2022.